Hey everyone, Milton here, joined by Zap behind me taking a nap. Zap is actually a big fan of KIllTeam. I'll put a picture up. Back to talk about Tempestus Aquillons today. So this is a part of a series of shorter videos on specific matchups for Blades of Khaine, focusing on the most important ploys and abilities and giving some suggestions as to how I approach them. But before I start, while I have a lot of experience with Blades of Khaine, my approach is by no means the only way. If you have an additional advice on specific matchups, please put it in the comments. I want this playlist to be as complete a resource as possible for folks learning to play the team, and other viewpoints as a part of that. If you have particular matchups you want to talk about, feel free to hit me up on Discord and we can chat. I'm not going to go through these matchup videos in any particular order. I wanted to talk about Tempestus Aquillons today for two reasons. One, because with the very recent balanced data slate changes, we're probably going to see them more in tournaments going forward. And two, because I've been working on painting mine up. They're not done yet, but I'll put a photo up. So yeah, was interested in the team, and here we are. So Tempestus Aquillons are an 11 model team as of the most recent balanced data slate, coming in at 8 wounds each, with 4 up saves. They're very light on melee power, but they do have quite a few really good gunners, and have a great tool to deliver their damage in the first half of the game in their team rule, drop insertion. So let's talk a bit about drop insertion. I'm not going to read through it line by line. I'll put a picture of it up here. It's also available on the Warhammer community site for free. But what does this do? Well, they can deploy only a third of their team. The rest of them start off the board. And then in turns 1 and 2, they can bring those models in around their drop markers. The most important things to keep in mind here are, 1, they have to come in within 3 inches, not completely within 3 inches. So that can be 3 inches from the edge of the marker to the back of their base, so they can really come in kind of about 4 inches away. So it's very important to keep that in mind when you're trying to stage your own models. When they drop a model in, it is obscured until the end of the following activation. So if they drop a model in, you cannot then on your activation immediately shoot at it, at least not profitably. So again, important to keep in mind as you're figuring out your trading patterns in the game. And they also have a piece of equipment that lets them move that marker laterally. So on turn 2 especially, it's when they have to bring in their whole team and they only have one marker left on the board, but it can be right up near the center line. It's really important to keep in mind exactly where they can come in so that you can position your models where they don't just get killed by a melt-a-gun or a melt-a-bomb. So let's talk a little bit about important ploys and equipment next. There are 2 ploys that I wanted to highlight here. The first one is Eye Above. I'll put the text up here, but basically what they do is they select one of our operatives and then any other of our operatives near it, and they're detected. The most important thing here is that if they're fighting or retaliating against us, they can use one of their successful blocks to block 2 dice, kind of like Dueler for Angels of Death. So this is obviously very good if they're trying to not die in melee, right? So it's important to try and not cluster all of your models that are going to be trading in a turn right on top of each other, where they can all get hit by the same ploy, and then you can potentially end up in a situation where the Tempestus player can double parry and survive a bunch of combats where you really ought to be killing them. The other ploy here that I wanted to talk a bit about is Hot Drop. Hot Drop changed significantly. What it does is it lets them basically get relentless. It used to only work if they were dropping down, so dropping down onto their markers, or if they're coming off of a vantage. But now it works if they are on our half of the board. So for this reason, they have access to really reliable shooting within 6 inches with all of these effective gunners and their melt-a-gun and their plasma and all these things. So that means that they're incentivized to push aggressively onto our half of the board. It means you probably don't want to be running any security tac ops like contain, and you don't really want to rely on, like, oh, I'm sure they'll miss a bunch of their shots. They very well may not. So if you're getting shot at, you will probably die. The best defense is to not be shot at. Now, I also wanted to mention a little bit of their equipment. They will probably be taking Tempestus daggers. It gives all of them a melee attack except for the servo sentry. It's not a great melee attack. They only have 3 attack dice, and they're only hitting on 4s, even with the daggers. So their only melee threats are going to be their sergeant, who has either a chainsword or a power weapon, and then their precursor, who has a slightly better dagger, but can resolve 2 hits in a row if they're the one charging. So, important to keep in mind where those 2 melee pieces are, but otherwise, even if they have the Tempestus daggers, Banshees or Scorpions both kill them very effectively in melee. The other piece of equipment that's very important here, I guess there's kind of 2 others. The drop augury, once per battle, allows them to move their drop marker, but it can't be moved closer to their opponent's drop zone, so they can move it laterally. This is very important to keep in mind if you are playing on Into the Dark, where they can potentially move it through an ITD wall and then kind of recommit the rest of their forces to another lane of the board. So very important to keep in mind as you're trying to plan out your turn where they might use drop augury. Second is the remote overseer. Once per battle, they can re-roll their initiative die. So if you're building game plan around, like, oh, surely I'll win initiative here and then I can, do something, it may not work. It really is, in my opinion, best in this matchup to play very safe. Okay, so that's poison equipment. Let's talk briefly about a couple of important operatives. The Tempestor is their leader. It is also their comms. So he is APL 3, and he can spend 1 APL to hand out an APL like a comms to somebody else. So it will generally start on the board. It's one of their 2 melee operatives. And again, it's important to keep track of where they can and can't use their comms. Second is the Precursor. The Precursor is their melee operative, and what they do is they can resolve 2 hits in a row. Let's say, I don't know why. Sorry, I was trying to pull up the cards and my computer's doing something weird. I'll figure it out later. Anyways, the Precursor can charge and kill our operatives because it can push through 2 crits for 8. So try not to let it be charging you. It is also the only one of their operatives that can drop directly into melee. However, on turn 1, that's very unlikely to be relevant or happening. On turn 2, it's only going to happen if you've thrown a model forward. So just be conscious of what you're throwing forward, trying to trade in melee, and try not to open yourself up to getting got easily. All right. So there are other important operatives. They're gunners and they're grenadier. They just have access to a lot of piercing. They have access to a lot of heavy damage. They hit on 3s. They can potentially get a bunch of rerolls. So don't get shot. And then TAC Ops, they have access to Seek and Destroy or Recon. Oftentimes they'll end up taking plant beacons because they also have a firefight ploy to do a mission action for free. So they generally can get those beacons across the board quite easily, pretty reliably. But then let's talk a little bit about how to approach the matchup. The biggest piece of advice here is to play Turning Point 2 slow. You've got to be prepared to pivot to the side of their board where their drop token isn't, because they'll only have 1 at the end of at the start of Turning Point 2. So you want to be able to move to wherever they're not immediately threatening to drop a bunch of guys on top of your head. And you want to really try and avoid giving them any material for free. We're only 8 models. They have 11 now, so they have quite a few activations more than us. We have to be really careful about trying to preserve our material and to try and get opportunities for double kills. Let's see, I already talked a little bit about their ability to move their drop token. So again, important to keep in mind, they can use it to shift their 1 marker on Turning Point 2 to the side. So if you're trying to find a safe place to hide, keep that in mind. Remember that they can move that once per game, and that can change the sort of lines that they can get on you. And if you've got to hide, you're usually going to have to hide fairly far back. staging up scorpions with super conceal, you'll probably be in a situation where you're going to give up some points on turning point 2. That is a better option than running too far forward and giving up a bunch of your models for free on turning point 2, right? So if you can set up a situation where you're able to, safely stage and potentially threaten one or two things in melee if they drop down, I think that's where you want to be. Because once they've got everything on the board, they become a much more honest team. At that point, they're just APL2 guys with the comms, and you know where they're going to move. So if you can weather that turning point 1 and turning point 2, the game gets significantly easier, and it will be much simpler to try and get those double kills when they can't, interrupt things dropping guys in on you. If you're going to go in, try and get double kills, and try to hide in combat with multiple models if you can, if they have guys that drop in close to each other. So, like I said earlier, the Precursor and the Leader are their only melee threats. Their Leader will almost always start on the table, so it can hand out comms turning point 1 to some of their gunners, so they can threaten to move and dash on turning point 2. If you can hide in melee, they can't shoot you, and the only way that they can really get at you if you're in melee with an activated model is dropping the Precursor into you. And between, a Howling Banshee being able to pre-parry or potentially Runish Shielding, you've got a decent odds of surviving the Precursor and continuing to be there and be a real problem for them. Now, as far as team composition, again, I like to play a mixed team here. I think that the Dire Avengers are really quite strong at, keeping them honest, not letting them just run up the board wherever they want to be, and making it so that they have to make real decisions about where they're dropping in, trying to come in and cover, and not just, coming in wherever they want to stage for the following turn. The Striking Scorpion Exarch with a Claw, with Manda Blasters and a crit, is dealing 8 damage in one hit, so that's your best bet for killing them without taking any return damage in melee. You can also, however, take a Dire Avenger Exarch with a Shimmer Shield and a Portable Barricade, which is the thing that I've done a couple times, because as long as they're not within 2 inches of you, he does become very difficult for them to kill. However, you want to make sure that you're avoiding their Sniper, their Melt-A-Bomb, and their Melt-A-Gun, because they can get dev wounds. If they roll some 6s, you just immediately die. I think the Striking Scorpion Exarch with a Claw is probably your better bet, but the Dire Avenger Exarch is funnier, so do what you want to do there. I think this is a decent matchup for us. However, you really have to be careful on turning point 2. If you get through that turn without losing too much, the game gets a lot easier. But if you let them get a line on 2 of your operatives on turning point 2 and they delete things, the game can pretty quickly snowball out of reach. So just be careful. Make sure that you're avoiding their hot drop threats, and then once they're all on the board, you can just approach it like a normal game. Alright, I hope some of that helps. If you have any thoughts, again, throw them in the comments, and see y'all soon. Bye.